Every Sunday morning at 4:30 a.m., while most of his generation sleeps off Saturday night, 23-year-old Marcus rises in complete darkness. No alarm, no hesitation. He pulls on simple clothes, skips breakfast, and drives 40 minutes to a monastery where he'll spend the next 4 hours in silence, prayer, and physical labor before most people have checked their phones. Marcus isn't preparing for the priesthood. He's a software engineer at a tech startup. He lifts weights 4 times a week, has a girlfriend, enjoys craft beer with friends, and yes, he's on Instagram. But 6 months ago, he left the contemporary church he grew up in, the one with the coffee bar and the rock band, and committed himself to something his parents find baffling. He joined an Orthodox Christian parish where services last 3 hours, where you stand the entire time, where the liturgy is chanted in ancient languages, and where the rules are strict, uncompromising, and deliberately difficult. Marcus isn't alone. Across America, something strange is happening. While overall church attendance continues its decades-long decline, while mainline Protestant denominations hemorrhage members, and while the very concept of organized religion becomes increasingly unfashionable among young people, one particular demographic is bucking every trend. Young men, specifically Gen Z men born between 1997 and 2012, are converting to the most demanding, most traditional, most intellectually and physically rigorous forms of Christianity in record numbers. They're becoming Orthodox. They're discovering traditional Latin Mass Catholicism. They're joining Reformed churches with 3-hour Sunday services and rigorous catechism classes. They're reading theology written by 4th century desert fathers and medieval scholastics. The numbers tell a story that defies everything we thought we knew about young people and religion. A 2023 survey by the Pew Research Center found that among Americans under 30 who identify as Christian, 18% now attend high liturgy or traditional services, up from just 9% in 2015. That's a doubling in 8 years. But the gender split reveals something even more striking. Among Gen Z men who attend church regularly, 24% now choose traditional or liturgical expressions, compared to just 12% of Gen Z women. In Orthodox Christianity specifically, a faith tradition that represents less than 1% of Americans, seminary enrollment has surged 87% since 2017, with the average age of converts dropping from 42 to 28. The Assembly of Canonical Orthodox Bishops reports that between 2015 and 2023, the number of adult male converts under 30 tripled. These aren't just statistics. Walk into an Orthodox Vespers service in Nashville, Tennessee, or a traditional Latin Mass in Denver, Colorado, or a Reformed Presbyterian church in Austin, Texas, and you'll see something that looks demographically impossible. Rooms full of men in their 20s, many with beards and button-down shirts, standing through hours of ancient liturgy, crossing themselves, kneeling on stone floors, chanting responses in Greek or Latin, completely absorbed in religious practices that their secular friends would find incomprehensible. Father Josiah Trenum, who has overseen the conversion of over 300 young men to Orthodox Christianity at his parish in Riverside, California, puts it bluntly. I'm seeing young men who are hungry for something hard. They're not interested in church being easy or comfortable or convenient. They want truth, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. His parish, St. Andrew Orthodox Church, has seen its membership grow from 85 families in 2010 to over 400 in 2024, with the majority of new members being men under 35, many of them unmarried. Sunday services start at 8:30 a.m. and often don't end until noon. There's no seating. The liturgy is almost entirely sung or chanted. The theology is dense, complex, drawing on 15 centuries of tradition. The fasting rules are strict. No meat, dairy, eggs, fish, wine, or oil on Wednesdays and Fridays, plus 4 extended fasting seasons throughout the year. When Father Josiah asks converts what attracted them, the most common answer isn't community or music or feeling welcome. It's, I was tired of religion that asked nothing of me. Hey there, this is Professor Archive, and welcome to what might be the most unexpected religious trend of our generation. Before we go deeper, I want to know, where in the world are you watching this from, and what time is it there? Drop your location and time in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how global this conversation is. And if you're finding value in this deep dive, consider leaving a super thanks. It directly supports the research that makes these documentaries possible. Now, let's unpack why the hardest path has become the most attractive. To understand this phenomenon, you have to understand what these young men are rejecting. Marcus, the software engineer we met earlier, grew up in what's often called a seeker-sensitive evangelical church. The model emerged in the 1980s and dominated American Protestantism for decades. Casual dress, contemporary music, services designed to be accessible and non-threatening. Sermons focused on practical life advice, minimal liturgy, minimal theology, maximum relevance to modern life. The idea was to remove barriers to faith, to make church feel comfortable, to meet people where they were. It felt like a TED Talk with worship songs, Marcus explains. The pastor wore jeans and sneakers. The sermons were always about, like, managing your anxiety or being a better leader or 5 principles for a happy marriage. Which is fine, I guess, but I started wondering, is this it? Is this all Christianity is? Self-help with Jesus language? This sentiment echoes across hundreds of interviews with young male converts. 25-year-old Connor, who converted to Catholicism and now attends traditional Latin Mass in Chicago, describes his evangelical upbringing as spiritually anorexic. We sang songs about how amazing God is, but we never talked about what made God amazing. We were told to have a personal relationship with Jesus, but nobody explained who Jesus actually was, theologically speaking. It was all emotion, no substance. I felt like I was being handed spiritual baby food when I was starving for actual meat. The data supports this feeling of theological hollowness. A 2022 study by the Barna Group found that only 17% of evangelical Christians ages 18 to 29 could articulate basic theological concepts like the Trinity, the Incarnation, or justification by faith. Among young men specifically, 64% reported that their church teaching felt repetitive and shallow, while 71% said they wanted more challenging and intellectually rigorous content. Yet, when Barna surveyed pastors of contemporary churches, 78% said they deliberately avoided complex theology because they assumed young people wouldn't engage with it. This assumption, it turns out, was catastrophically wrong, at least for young men. Dr. Shadi Hamid, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution who has studied religious trends among young Americans, argues that the seeker-sensitive model fundamentally misunderstood male psychology. There's robust evidence that men, particularly young men, are attracted to challenge, to hierarchy, to systems that demand something of them. The modern church tried to compete with secular culture by becoming more like secular culture, more casual, more therapeutic, more inclusive in a way that eliminated any sense of costly commitment. But that's precisely what made it unappealing to many men. You can't create a sense of meaning and purpose by lowering all the barriers to entry. Enter the hard churches. Orthodox Christianity, with its 2,000-year-old liturgy sung in ancient tones, its strict fasting calendar, its emphasis on physical discipline, its unapologetic claim to be the one true church unchanged since the apostles. Traditional Catholicism with Mass in Latin, incense, bells, ornate vestments, hour-long ceremonies where congregants kneel and stand repeatedly, theology drawn from Thomas Aquinas and Augustine. Reformed Protestantism, with its intensive catechism classes, its 3-hour Sunday services including detailed expository preaching, its rejection of contemporary worship for psalm singing, and hymns written centuries ago. These traditions share common characteristics that directly contradict everything the seeker-sensitive movement stood for. They're difficult. They require learning Latin or Greek or liturgical responses. They demand physical endurance, standing or kneeling for hours. They impose strict moral and dietary rules. They're intellectually demanding, requiring engagement with complex theology and church history. They're aesthetically foreign, using ancient music and imagery rather than contemporary styles. They make exclusive truth claims, asserting they possess something other churches have lost. And crucially, they're the same on Sunday morning in Tokyo, Moscow, Rome, or Des Moines. There's no customization for local culture, no adjustment for contemporary preferences. You conform to the tradition doesn't conform to you. Jordan Peterson, the clinical psychologist whose lectures have attracted millions of young male viewers, many of whom have subsequently explored traditional Christianity, frames this in terms of meaning and responsibility. Men need a weight to carry, Peterson argues. They need something difficult to do, a dragon to slay, a genuine challenge that demands their full capacity. Modern culture keeps telling young men that toxic masculinity is the problem, that they need to be less assertive, less hierarchical, less competitive. Then they wonder why young men are depressed and directionless. These traditional churches are offering young men exactly what they're starving for: a cosmic battle between good and evil where they have a meaningful role to play, clear rules and expectations, a centuries-tested path to follow, and the promise that the struggle itself has transcendent purpose. 26-year-old James embodies this psychology. A former Marine who served in Afghanistan, he returned home to Tennessee feeling disconnected from civilian life. The military gave me structure, purpose, a code to live by, something bigger than myself, he explains. When I got out, I tried going to the church my family attended. It was nice. People were friendly, but it felt weightless. The pastor kept talking about Jesus making your life better, easier, more fulfilling, but I didn't want easy. Easy felt meaningless. I wanted something worth dying for, not something to make my life more comfortable. James discovered Orthodox Christianity through, improbably, a podcast about ancient philosophy. I was listening to this discussion of Stoicism and virtue ethics, and someone mentioned that Eastern Christianity had developed this incredibly sophisticated system for spiritual warfare, for battling your passions, for achieving what they called theosis, becoming like God through discipline and grace. That sounded like what I needed, not therapy, not self-help, spiritual warfare. So I found a parish, showed up to a Saturday Vespers, and immediately thought, this is it. This is what I've been missing. James now attends services 3 to 4 times a week, fasts according to the Orthodox calendar roughly half the year, meets with his spiritual father monthly for confession and spiritual direction, prays the Jesus Prayer hundreds of times daily, and is working through a systematic reading of the Church Fathers. People think it sounds oppressive, he says, but it's the opposite. All the rules, all the structure, they're not restricting me. They're training me. Like the military trained my body, Orthodoxy is training my soul. And just like military training, it's hard, but that's precisely why it works. The masculine language and imagery prevalent in traditional Christianity stands in stark contrast to contemporary expressions. Orthodox prayers frequently reference warfare, athletes training for competition, soldiers enduring hardship. The lives of saints emphasized are often martyrs who died brutal deaths rather than compromise, desert fathers who lived in extreme asceticism, missionaries who endured incredible suffering. The spiritual life is framed as a battle with clear enemies: sin, death, the devil, one's own passions and weaknesses. Father Andrew Stephen Damick, who wrote a book specifically addressing male converts to orthodoxy, notes this martial element. Our tradition talks about spiritual athletes, soldiers of Christ, warriors fighting invisible warfare against demons and passions. This isn't metaphorical fluff. The lives of the saints are full of men who endured torture, exile, starvation, rather than abandon the faith. We venerate them, celebrate them, hold them up as examples. For young men who've grown up in a culture that's deeply ambivalent about traditional masculinity, who've been told that male strength and aggression are inherently problematic, discovering a tradition that says, no, those instincts can be sanctified, directed toward holy purposes, used in spiritual combat, that's profoundly attractive. The statistics on mental health among young men add another dimension to this story. According to the American Psychological Association, rates of depression and anxiety among males aged 18 to 25 increased 134% between 2005 and 2023. Suicide rates for men in this demographic rose 56% in the same period. A 2023 survey by the Survey Center on American Life found that 49% of men under 30 reported having no close friends, up from 27% in 2013. young men are more socially isolated, more purposeless, more mentally unwell than any previous generation. Traditional churches offer a comprehensive response to this crisis, one that goes far beyond Sunday morning. When 22-year-old David converted to Catholicism and began attending traditional Latin Mass in Philadelphia, he didn't just find a church service. He found an entire social infrastructure. Within 2 months, I had a group of guys I met with weekly to pray the rosary. I had older men who mentored me, who I could call when I was struggling. I had friends who were serious about their faith, who weren't just going through the motions. We'd fast together, study theology together, go to confession together. One of the guys helped me get a better job. Another introduced me to the woman who's now my fiancée. The intentional community aspect of these hard churches can't be overstated. Because the demands are high, because the commitment is serious, a natural filtering occurs. The people who show up week after week, who fast, who study, who engage with the tradition's full demands, tend to be equally serious, equally committed. This creates a high-trust community in an era of social fragmentation. Father Patrick Reardon, an Orthodox priest whose Chicago parish has seen remarkable growth among young professionals, explains, "When you fast together, when you stand through a 3-hour paschal vigil that starts at midnight, when you're confessing your sins to the same priest, when you're reading the same prayers at the same times each day, bonds form that are qualitatively different from what you get in a casual church environment. These young men are finding brotherhood in the deepest sense. They're finding other men who will tell them the truth, hold them accountable, be there at 3 a.m. when they're struggling. That's rare in modern American life. The online component of this movement reveals another fascinating layer. While these young men are embracing ancient, pre-modern religious forms, they discovered them through thoroughly modern means. YouTube channels, podcasts, Twitter discussions, Reddit communities, and Instagram accounts dedicated to traditional Christianity have exploded in recent years. The trad cath aesthetic, featuring images of incense, stained glass, Latin text, and Baroque art, has become a genuine social media phenomenon, with accounts like Awat Trad Catholic and Orthodox Christian accumulating hundreds of thousands of followers, predominantly young and male. Jonathan Peugeot, an Orthodox icon carver whose YouTube channel has over 200,000 subscribers, most between ages 18 and 34, observes, "The internet is how most of these guys first encounter traditional Christianity. They might see a clip of Orthodox chant, or a discussion of Catholic philosophy, or someone explaining ancient Christian cosmology. It piques their interest because it's so radically different from anything they've encountered. It's exotic, ancient, mysterious, but also deeply rational, with sophisticated theological arguments developed over centuries. That combination, the mystical and the rational, the ancient and the intellectually rigorous, really resonates with young men who feel like modern culture offers them neither deep mystery nor serious rationality. The intellectual component bears emphasizing. These aren't anti-intellectual fundamentalists. Many converts specifically cite the philosophical sophistication of traditional Christianity as a primary attraction. 27-year-old Nathaniel, who has a PhD in physics and converted to Catholicism 3 years ago, explains his journey. "I'd been an atheist since high school. I believed science had basically disproven religion. But then I actually started reading Christian philosophy and theology, not the pop-level stuff, but Aquinas, Augustine, the Cappadocian Fathers, Gregory Palamas. I realized these were some of the most brilliant minds in human history, developing incredibly sophisticated arguments about metaphysics, epistemology, ethics. I couldn't dismiss it as primitive superstition anymore. These traditions had rigorously thought through every objection I could raise. Eventually, I had to admit the intellectual case for Christianity was stronger than I'd assumed. That opened the door to actually engaging with it spiritually. Data from Orthodox and traditional Catholic seminaries confirms this intellectual trend. According to records from St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, 43% of their students entering between 2020 and 2024 held advanced degrees in fields outside theology, including engineering, computer science, philosophy, and mathematics. St. John's Seminary in Boston, which offers traditional Catholic formation, reports that average GRE scores for incoming students increased from the 67th percentile in 2010 to the 84th percentile in 2023, suggesting more academically accomplished candidates are seeking traditional priesthood. We're getting brilliant young men, guys who could be making six figures in tech or finance, who instead want to dedicate their lives to the church. They're not fleeing intellectual rigor, they're seeking it. They want to study Greek and Hebrew, to engage with patristics and dogmatic theology, to understand liturgical history. These are guys who read for pleasure, who listen to lectures on ancient philosophy, who take their intellectual formation seriously. The aesthetics matter too, perhaps more than previous generations of religious leaders understood. Traditional churches offer beauty, a concept largely abandoned in contemporary American Protestantism. The Orthodox Divine Liturgy, virtually unchanged since the 9th century, involves elaborate vestments, gold-covered iconostases, flickering candles, clouds of incense, haunting Byzantine chant. Traditional Latin Mass features Gregorian chant, ornate vestments, precise choreography developed over centuries, Renaissance polyphony, Gothic architecture. Even Reformed churches emphasizing simplicity offer a severe, intentional aesthetic. Buildings designed to focus attention on the word, hymnody with four-part harmony written by composers like Bach and Handel. I work in visual communication. I understand how aesthetics shape consciousness. When I walked into my first Orthodox church, I immediately felt that everything had been designed to communicate transcendence. The icons, the architecture, the music, the smell of incense, even the way light came through the windows. It was Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art, all pointing toward the divine. Compare that to the contemporary church I grew up in, which literally met in a repurposed warehouse with a projector screen and a band that sounded like third-rate Coldplay. One was saying, "God is awesome and transcendent and holy." The other was saying, "God is your buddy who wants you to feel comfortable." The aesthetics matched the theology, and I wanted the former. Research by neuroscientist Andrew Newberg on religious experience supports this aesthetic dimension. His studies using brain imaging during religious practices show that ritualistic, aesthetic-rich worship involving incense, chant, and repetitive physical movements activates different neural pathways than contemporary worship. Specifically, traditional liturgical worship engages areas associated with transcendent experience, loss of self, and connection to something beyond the individual, while contemporary worship primarily activates areas associated with emotional arousal and social bonding. For young men seeking genuine transcendent experience rather than emotional satisfaction, the aesthetic and liturgical richness of traditional churches offers something contemporary churches simply cannot replicate. But there's a darker element to this story that demands examination. Not all young men discovering traditional Christianity are motivated by pure spiritual seeking. The overlap between certain online traditional Christian communities and far-right political movements, white nationalism, and misogynistic ideologies is real and troubling. The same platforms where young men discover Orthodox chant and Thomistic philosophy also host content promoting authoritarian politics, conspiracy theories, and deeply problematic gender ideologies. The trad movement, as it's sometimes called online, contains a visible minority who seem less interested in spiritual transformation and more interested in cultural warfare. In finding a religious tradition that validates pre-existing reactionary politics,